captains are even just like each other around the So this morning we want to focus on some ideas that have been bubbling up this weekend and in the months leading up to this. And that is the question, really, how do we come together? Because I think there is this feeling that we are coming together, in fact, across the universe of people, peace, and the planet. That in order to achieve security and justice in any one of these realms, we have to do it together because all of these things, our welfare, our health, our justice, as people, as a planet, and as a peaceful world, it's all interdependent. So it's inherently interrelated, but it's also interrelated as a practical matter because the powers that be out there who are driving us over the cliff want us to be divided and conquered.
That's right.
Because divided, you know, it will be very hard to get to that critical mass for critical change. So the question of the hour really is how do we come together? And those of us who've been working in the climate movement and climate justice and the many forms of justice that entails, you know, we've been feeling like the climate movement in particular is begging for redefinition. It's begging to be as big as the climate crisis that we're facing. We need a solution that's as big as the crisis. And the crisis is not simply the trees and the forests and the polar bears and our water supply and our food supply and our energy and our means of living, the biodiversity that our economy and our survival depends on, as if that wasn't important enough, you know. But that it encompasses as well the economic battles that we are fighting. The fact that 1 out of every 2 Americans is now, according to the Census Bureau, in poverty or close to it. The fact that 39 million students are in debt with no feasible way really to get out of it. They're effectively indentured servants. And the Department of Labor, in fact, says that 9 out of 10 jobs coming online in the next decade are going to be low-wage, insecure jobs that don't require a college degree and don't pay college wages, so how exactly are those college students going to pay their debt back? They're not going to. So we got a lot of students, a lot of working people who are basically being locked out of even subsistence, you know, who are like sub-poverty right now and declining. Because the Department of Labor also says that half of those jobs that are being created don't even require a high school degree and don't pay high school wages. So we are being engineered into a real poverty economy, a sub-poverty economy. We who are, you know, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, in fact, you know. So what's going on here is just a taste of the kinds of oppression and inequality and the economic struggle that's going on around the world. And of course, peace is implicit in all of this because, for example, it is the war machine that consumes, or I should say that produces half of the carbon burden, half of the greenhouse gases are produced, in fact, by the military. So in order to get to peace, we obviously have to wind down those military productions of carbon, the military use of energy, and we've got to wind down the military because it's not making the world a safer, more peaceful, or democratic place. So all these things really converge. So what we're talking about here today is really how do we step up this convergence? And in fact, we see this movement for democracy and justice that's really sweeping the planet right now. From the democracy revolutions in the Middle East, the Occupy protests, which still live on in many ways. We heard last night some very exciting things about what Occupy is up to. and the anti-austerity uprisings across Europe, now in Brazil, which really continue very much all over the world. And in addition, we had 2 million people come out to stop Monsanto and GMOs with about 2 weeks' notice last May or June, whenever it was. 2 million people who came out to stop GMOs alone. We have teachers and students who are standing up to stop the privatization of our schools, to stop student debt. We have the eviction blockades going on, led in particular by the African American community and their incredible vision and courage to stand up for their communities. We're seeing the Idle No More campaign bring the courage and the vision of the First Nations to this struggle. And then the fights against fracking, against tar sands, against offshore oil and Arctic exploration, and that's actually shutting down some of our nuclear power plants. So we have this incredibly powerful movement. Can you imagine what if we all came out on the same day? It would totally bring the machine to a dead, screeching halt. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we bring together this convergence? How do we accelerate this convergence for people, peace, and the planet? And how do we then power it up? And in many ways, that's asking the question, how do we take the power that we already have? Because of those numbers I recited, we clearly are the majority. And on poll after poll, we have majority support for downsizing the military, for bringing the troops home, for putting a halt to climate change, for making education public and affordable from kindergarten through college, for ensuring that everyone has a job at a living wage. There is public support out there for all of this. So this is a big wake-up moment, and the crisis of the climate movement is an incredible opportunity to use that mobilization around this perceived threat that people are waking up to all over the place, to use that energy to help us overcome our traditional barriers and our traditional fears about working together. So how do we seize this moment and seize our power in order to seize our future and take back the peaceful, just, green future we deserve? That's the question of the hour. We're going to try to speed through our discussion here, and I may pop out to just try to find Sherry, because Sherry Mitchell may have just sort of gotten lost between the very busy plenaries that she's on. So I'll see if I can bring her in as well while we get started. And we'll try to limit our discussions to 10 minutes apiece so that we can have some time for open discussion. But I want to just draw your attention to the discussion that will happen at 2 o'clock today from 2 to 4. Is really a continuation of this session, and that's the plenary roundtable, which will be devoted entirely to our collective discussion about how do we move forward and power up for people, peace, and the planet. So what we don't get to by way of discussion in this session, we will have, so jot down your thoughts and your questions and your feedback and save them for this afternoon. So to start us off, let's see. Victor. Okay, Victor Wallis. Go ahead. And the speakers will briefly introduce themselves. Their longer bios are in the program as well.
Thanks,
so,
Jill.
Victor,
I would just mention also that contrary to the program, this afternoon's session is going to be in room 240 over there, so don't miss it. My introduction, the main thing, I'm the editor of the journal Socialism and Democracy, which I hope you'll all check out at some point. It comes out 3 times a year, and it doesn't specialize in this issue area, but it tries to cover the general field of what we're concerned with accomplishing. I've also written, my ecological articles most recently have appeared in the monthly review a couple of times. and I teach part-time at the Berklee College of Music in the Boston area. I've been amazed at this convention by the level of the discussion on all these issues and finding it very difficult to add to something, but I guess what we're involved in is precisely a process of brainstorming about all these things, and so I hope that just by combining some thoughts and so on, I can contribute a little bit to that general discussion. I'm still impressed that despite, appreciate the very encouraging view that Jill has given us of the prospects and the potential for our movement, but I'm still on a daily basis feeling a kind of frustration between the magnitude of the threat and the danger that we face and the still absence of any really big visible, let's say, continuing public discussion about it. There may be episodic demonstrations and so on, but I mean, in terms of the day-to-day consciousness of people, their integration of the issue of the environment into all their thoughts, which is really what we're looking for, this I don't yet find. And I think my thoughts about all this are directed at asking really how the environmental discussion can become a part of people's day-to-day lives, how we can see it as part of every issue so that it's not viewed as a separate track of a multiple issue thing, but as something that's integral to every other issue. And I know there's been a lot of recognition of that already in this conference, but I think it needs to be underlined in many different ways. My basic view of this is that, of course, the environmental crisis is in a way the ultimate crisis of capitalism, in the sense that it puts the light, it sheds a spotlight on the basic core striving of capitalism, which is for perpetual growth and expansion. The environmental crisis is what has disclosed to all of us that this is an untenable way of living. And I've been extremely interested by all the discussions of the particular advantages and disadvantages, strengths and weaknesses of particular alternative energy forms, which is an essential part of the discussion. But my focus has been on the complementary, let's say, point that whatever the combination of forms of energy we select, we need to reduce the total demand on the energy grid in whatever form altogether. And that this task is what directly engages the question of the fundamental social reorganization. And so the challenge is how to bring about this transformation. And I guess the central point that I would want to put forward, which again is, I've heard in various forms expressed in this conference, is that an explanation of the need for radical transformation, of the need for a totally different economic system, broadly understood as socialism, but still requiring definition, that has to be integral to the public advancement of an ecological perspective. And for many people, this is counterintuitive. They say, well, let's just get on with it about the environmental issue and leave aside the potentially divisive question of whether you favor socialism against capitalism, because that can only divide people and so on. But I would say, on the contrary, that in view of the kinds of changes that need to be made in the society, and in view of the amount of popular involvement that's necessary, unless we integrate into our discussion of the environment our analysis of what needs to be changed in the society in detail, we won't have an impact. And I think a lot of people have referred to the fact that people are ready for this kind of observation. So what it underlies is the fact that the issue of the environment is in fact a class issue, in the sense that the capitalist class is the one that is responsible for constantly pushing forward this growth and expansion under the rubric or the pretext of getting jobs for everyone. And what we are involved with in countering that is largely an effort to redefine the nature of work, to recognize that the real task for innovation is innovating in the forms of organization of the society at every level, and the idea that the tasks that people have cannot be defined on the basis of a labor exchange or market type of relationship, but on the basis of a responsibility to the community, which may engage them and will engage them in different types of work, perhaps at different times. We've heard a lot about the harm done by industrial agriculture and so on. So obviously one of the things, for example, that will be necessary will be for more people to be involved in agricultural work so that we restore some of the labor-intensive aspect of that, but not that people be on a massive scale restored to exclusively engage in that, but that it be integrated and become part of the life of more people. So, and that there, the scale of spatial rearrangements that will be necessary, for example, to solve the transportation problem, really, I envisage digging up whole areas that are now taken up by parking lots and restoring them to green space. All the organization that goes into that is something that requires a tremendous amount of imaginative social innovation and a challenge to the way people interact with each other, to basic assumptions that are constantly reproduced in our present society, which have to be called into question. And this is, I think this just underlines the point that we, of the integration of all these issues, and that what this is set over against is the agenda of the dominant group, which essentially reacts to the environmental crisis, which it does recognize. I mean, it's more, let's say, enlightened sectors do recognize. They react to it by trying to hoard and monopolize and so on, and carry us to emphasize or amplify all the dangerous trends that already exist. And we have to pose against that a very comprehensive kind of response. And so that ironically, the more sweeping view that we have, the more it will actually engage people ultimately, and because people don't give up their time and their energy for a limited, narrowly defined goal, but for something that can inspire them. It does require a kind of total vision. So this is really what I put forward, and I hope to engage with all of you on a continuing basis, how we can do this. So, thank you.
Oh, you still have.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
sorry,
that's all right. I've said enough.
Okay. Thank you. And Lauren? Lauren Regan?
So I'm Lauren Regan. I'm in the Attorney and Staff Executive Director for the Civil Liberties Defense Center out of Eugene, Oregon. We represent frontlines activist campaigns around the country, primarily where there aren't great access to political activist-oriented lawyers. We represent people in criminal court cases as well as helping them fight against SLAPP suits, which is where corporations sue campaigns and activists to try to shut them up. We also represent activists suing the police and government for misconduct and excessive force. And I coordinate the legal support for tar sands resistance around the country right now, primarily Utah, Texas, South Dakota, where things are kind of rearing up right now. And I kind of wanted to start by sort of dovetailing off of what Victor just mentioned. He talked about how, in addition to trying to stop specific tar sands mines or pipelines from going in the ground, that's kind of a reactionary approach. We also need to take a step back and sort of incorporate some of these systemic strategies and thoughts into our analysis as we're sitting around drinking beer with each other and having these conversations. And I agreed with everything that he said, especially in terms of needing to reduce consumption. I would also throw in there that we also need to look at population growth as a factor of that consumption need. And I also, maybe unpopularly, will say we really need to look at our diet in terms of livestock is one of the largest contributors to climate change, water degradation, land degradation, and loss of biodiversity. So everybody who goes and eats a CAFO farmed hamburger today is also contributing to the exacerbation of climate change. And there are lots of things in our individual days that we all try to do and can do to reduce our own impact. But looking, over 20% of climate change is due to dairy and livestock production. 64% of anthropogenic ammonia emissions, which contribute to acid rain and the acidification of ecosystems, is from the livestock industry. 70% of previously forested land in the Amazon is occupied by pastures, and feed crops cover a large part of the remainder of what was once, native rainforest. So there's lots of factors there, that I think we all need to look at in addition to what we're also already focusing on. In terms of kind of what my prepared remarks were, I think it's clear to most of us that traditional institutions have absolutely no power over current market economies. Our power to regulate these giant corporations really originates from the collective refusal of a significant section of the world's population to participate in the status quo. We have to drive up the social costs of the actions of the 1% and hit them where it hurts, which is their bottom line. And so when devising strategy, in my mind, I'm constantly thinking, how can we cause the most pain to those corporations every single day? The one-shot wonders every once in a while, the outreach, the media, the mobilization of those actions is good. But we, the people, have the element of surprise and unpredictability. When activists show up every few days to TransCanada's corporate offices and mess with those people and being able to do their job, and they have to install giant security cameras, and they're driving their Mercedes convertibles out of the parking lots looking over their shoulder for protesters. That is a win in a lot of ways. It makes them know they should not be so comfortable and where they sit upon this economic pyramid, and that we the people really do have the power at any time to shift this and mess with them back. They have money and power and ways to kill us, in a million different ways. But we, are like mosquitoes. There are far more of us than them, and we may be a nuisance factor now, but mosquitoes can take a cow down in a pasture and kill it. And I think that we all have the ability to do that within our movements and within ourselves. The central thesis of the book, The Poor People's Movements, is that popular movements are most effective when they seize moments of popular unrest, through strikes or sit-ins or other forms of direct action, instead of lobbying in respectable or socially acceptable ways. And we've seen this time and time again. From the rank and file strike waves of the 1930s to the nationwide sit-ins of the 1960s to the WTO in the 90s, we have seen illustrations of that power, and then we have seen the fear and draconian response by the state, to those efforts. And I think that that's kind of a glimmer of, what we could do if we, were able to sustain it. I don't think that we're going to see justice until billions of people all across the world have poured into the streets. We know how to spread a global movement. This global movement is going to be greatly assisted by the internet, which will allow us to overcome the limitations of distance and mathematics, of universal speech, and it allows us to overcome language barriers. Climate justice has become 350. Rejection of tyrannical rule in the Middle East has become the Arab Spring. Occupy Wall Street, the 99 percenters. And almost instantaneously, we have kind of created our own histories in making these moments in time. We're able to define our movements and control their message more now than ever before. Most of us, I would probably say in this room, get the majority of our news from independent media sources or the internet now, or at least we supplement it with that. And for the first time in a long time, having been a lifelong environmental activist, we can actually frame our own message and get it out there and not rely on some idiot from Fox News to, water down everything we say and make us look like fools. And I think that, and not only that, I think that we need to recognize that we should not be satisfied with fighting for mere survival. Some of the statistics that I gave and some of the discussion, it's as if we have to fight for just enough water to be able to drink and flush our toilets. But our struggle should also be one of dignity, of happiness, self-actualization. No longer should we allow ourselves to be cajoled by the fallacy that self-interest is the sole form of human motivation. It may be for those that find themselves atop that economic pyramid, structured toward relentless greed, but we can be sure that in a society that rewards a radically different and more positive social character, no economic pyramid is going to exist at all. And to me, that's the goal that I keep in my head every day as I work toward that goal. We may not have a fully conceived utopian conception of what the future will look like, but as Jill mentioned, we do share common values. And what unites us in those common values is much stronger than what divides us. Whether or not we use the S word or the A word, or what labels we give to our political beliefs or our ethics, should probably be the least important issue as we figure out how to move forward. Because, as has been mentioned, when I read FBI reports and discovery in the cases that I work on, it is absolutely ridiculous to see how the federal government psychologically profiles movement actors and what they think our motivations are. Everybody who gets arrested blocking down to tar sands pipes is being paid by some mysterious organization, because who would ever do that for free? Why would any of us, what is a lawyer doing down there, not being paid big bucks, to be there? They just have no conception of it, because they get paid for their 40-hour job working for the FBI or whatever it is. But we have the passion and drive to work for what we're doing out of love. And that will always, I think, trump somebody who's making a wage off of, basically harassing people who are acting for ethical reasons.
Thank you, Lauren. Stephanie, Kimball.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? Good. I'm excited to be here to talk to you about the climate movement through the local lens. So I will be further dovetailing off of Lauren now. My story is that I am a dentist by day and climate activist by night. So it wasn't always that way. As of 18 months ago, I was really concerned about the climate crisis, sitting in my apartment, just having moved to Madison, not knowing where to plug in. I had signed all the online petitions I could find. I'd written my blog, trying to get my voice out there, but I didn't feel like anything I could do was really going to get me involved in the systems change necessary to save us from the crisis. And so I was just feeling a lot of despair around that. And then I got an email from 350.org saying they wanted to start a local group. And so I took that first step and responded and met with local people who had the same concerns as me. And the hope that came from, and the energy that came from that were, it was very uplifting, and the best part about it was that the synergy that came from that has lifted all of our voices more than we thought possible. So I'm currently the coordinator of the 350.org group in Madison. I'm also in Citizens Climate Lobby and Sierra Club and a variety of other organizations. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we need to focus on developing strong community level climate movement. So what I'm mainly talking about is all of the things that Victor and Lauren have talked about. How do we get people that were in my position who cared to actually act on that? And beyond that, how do we get people who don't yet know that they care to start caring to then act on that? Okay. So the way 350 Madison is organized is we do local actions to connect the dots for people how climate change is impacting their lives. In addition, we take part in the national 350 campaigns like the Keystone Pipeline and the divestment movement, as well as international days of action where we're growing this network internationally. We've had organizational actions in every country except for North Korea. So, climate change is an unparalleled challenge, but it also provides this unique opportunity to create the best vision of our world through the communications like the internet and energy technologies. We're really feeling finally for the first time that there's this keen awareness that our destinies are truly tied together. To build these strong networked local communities, I believe is our best chance to transition to the resilient and just society that we need to in the short window of time we have before the climate crisis is irreversible. These deep systems changes can happen faster and in a more equitable way if strong communities help create them and don't just wait for one-size-fits-all top-down solutions. It can happen faster because we can leverage our existing local connections and relationships to mobilize for change. Locally, we are more trusted messengers. It will also be more equitable because each community can create democratic solutions that work for them. So what we need to do that is build entry points for individuals and groups who already care about the climate movement, or who already care about the climate but don't know where to plug in. And we also need to meet people where they are on the issue of climate change to then help them connect the dots and keep moving forward till we get them all out in the streets acting with us. So some examples of entry points that we've created here in town are, we had a teach-in at the farmers market about how climate change impacts farmers right now. And we had 8 different farmers from around the state come and talk about how they've been farming in the same land for 5 generations and now things aren't happening at the same time. Or the indigenous communities in the north of Wisconsin who have been producing maple syrup for years and that the warm spring didn't let them produce this year. So these are relatable things that people can say, that is weird, I did notice that too. And then it takes that next step for them where they might come to the next meeting, meet somebody who got arrested in DC for the Keystone Pipeline and say, maybe I shouldn't just be changing my light bulb, maybe that's not enough, maybe I see my neighbor doing this, I could do that too. And then we provide the forum for them to do that. We provide, any information they need on what is it like to be arrested, what is it like to, take these next steps of activism. So what we've done in Madison is create a climate coalition where we have all of these groups working on climate from different angles to try to connect people to where their passions are. So we work with Climate Reality Project and Wisconsin Interfaith Power and Light for religious communities, Madison area bus advocates to do local solutions, Citizens Climate Lobby if you want to talk about a revenue neutral carbon tax. Not everybody agrees on the routes to this, but if we can get people in where they're comfortable and keep moving them up the ladder of activism, I think that's our best chance locally of building this movement as fast as we need to. So what about people who don't yet care about climate? Well, we need to tell them step by step how, from where they are to the solutions we need, how to go along that route. So we need to bring people who are neutral on the issue, say a working mom, she has 2 jobs and hasn't thought about how climate change affects her kids yet because she's too busy talking about how her next paycheck is going to affect her kids. She is a perfect person to reach out to and explain how this will affect her kids and get her to the next step of activism. Someone on the passive opposition side of things might be a Republican who's voted Republican for 40 years, so he just goes along with the party line. So he's in opposition to the climate science because his leaders are right now. But if we really talk to him and find out where our common values are, then we can co-create this vision of our future together because they will feel like their values are represented in this vision of our future. So ways we can connect with these common values are by finding, connecting, and empowering messengers that are trusted by them. So we need to reach out to a PTA member who we know might be a liberal and talk to them about how they should be talking to the PTA, and then if the PTA has an event around this, then it could get that working mom of two to realize how it relates to her because she's talking to another mom, and finding that common ground. We can also look at values-based engagement in other ways that we might not necessarily always think of, like patriotism. You know, I know this is an international issue, but for some people who want America to be first, you know, we can talk to them about how the U.S. could lead this energy revolution, and individualism. You know, you can create your own energy in your own home. Safety, no more resource wars, that kind of thing. The other thing we are doing is, and we need to keep doing more of, is partnering with less traditionally aligned groups. So an example of this happening is the tar sands blockade and Bold, Nebraska, where around the Keystone fight, farmers, Tea Party members, environmentalists, faith communities, indigenous communities, they're all coming together around this fight and finding out that they have more in common than they thought. We need to be incredibly open-minded about the possibilities of finding these common values, because this week the Tea Party in Georgia actually fought for a solar project because they saw it as a free market choice. So the Koch brothers were trying to kill this resolution from happening in Georgia, and the Tea Party fought back and said, no, you're lying to us. We want this free choice. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily think of the Tea Party as an ally right now, but this shows that if we try to find that common ground, sometimes it actually happens. So here in Wisconsin, what we're doing is developing a climate and energy tent that is broad to expand into health, agriculture, unions, social justice, and business to foster broader engagement and cooperation on a variety of issues together. So that's something that here in Wisconsin we're having a big statewide meeting this year on. So if we have all of this local engagement across the spectrum, it will strengthen the movement, not only through daily relationship building and activating, but it will also ready us for those moments where we can mobilize around crucial points where shifts can arise and be ready to push forward with real power. And we'll have a real people-powered movement, because we will create an unstoppable force, because together the we will be so big. So, thank you.
Stephanie, Daniel, Lee, just say a few words about yourself.
Okay, if some of you were in the panel yesterday, you'll hear me repeat a little bit of what I said, but I'm Daniel Lee. I'm on the national leadership team of Move to Amend, and one of the reasons I got into working for Move to Amend is I met Dr. Ricky Ott, who is an environmental scientist at Sustainability Convergence in Davis, California, and she was doing a presentation on Move to Amend. And for a number of months leading up to that, I had been doing more climate and environmental activism in Los Angeles, where I live, but also doing a lot of research, and a lot of the research led me to the conclusions that Dr. Ott sort of sewed up for me, because everything that I saw that was needed to be done imminently if we were or we are to survive as a species, you know, everything that we needed to do was being held up by a corporation, which is why most of my activist work now is through Move to Amend. As I mentioned yesterday, one of the other people I met at the same convergence was Tim DeChristopher from Peaceful Uprising. And if a lot of people don't know who Tim is, but he basically, he bid on this public land that was being sold off basically to either loggers or utilities or something like that. And he went to jail for 2 years as a result, even though afterwards a federal judge ruled that the sale of the land was illegal in the first place. But Tim's story, and I think that your speech he gave at Power Shift was really inspiring, and I feel like it's inspiring actions for a lot of the climate activists who are doing things with Keystone XL and different type of fracking protests around the country. So that and Bill McKibben's push with 350.org are things that I really appreciate and understand, but I'm going to be a little critical about them. As I mentioned yesterday, I think one of the big things that we need to do as a movement, well, the first thing that we need to do as a movement, and one of the reasons that we're talking about some of these things more in some of our blast and blog posts on Move to Amend, is that we need to really connect all of the issues. A lot of our affiliates, frankly, do not like the fact that we will occasionally bring in another issue that's completely related to corporate personhood and talk about it. They feel that we need to just talk about amending the Constitution and just amending the Constitution because that's it. But our broader purpose is to affect real systematic change. Because I almost hate to use the phrase climate crisis because I think it sort of lost its meaning in a way, but we need to be more forthright and saying that what we're really talking about is a possible collapse, and what we're really looking at is extinction. And I don't want to be all like, you know, everything's going wrong, Chicken Little, blah blah blah. But that's the truth. So we really need to start talking about everything in that context and in a real way. A lot of times people, a lot of different issues, they're like, well, it's not going to affect me, or blah blah blah. And well, it's affecting us now, obviously. We have bigger storms. We have new types of crises each year. So one of the major things I think that we need to do, first of all, in terms of protest, is change the way we protest. I like the fact that Bill McKibben put the call out with 350 and everything, but one of the things I said yesterday, I feel like I need to repeat. The large 50,000 person demonstration in Washington, D.C. was good. We had about 10 or 15,000 people in Los Angeles at City Hall. But what we really need to do, if we can bring together that amount of people and hopefully larger amounts of people, is really protest at the real seat of power. And the real seat of power is not Washington, D.C. It's corporations. And the protests that are the most effective are the protests that disrupt business. Or one of the things that I was really encouraged by was Jill's running mate, Cherie, and the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign did a march from Philadelphia into DC, but they didn't march to the White House, and they didn't march to Congress. They marched to the Chamber of Commerce. Because that's where all the money is and that's where all the power is. And I think we need to change our focus in general, sort of like what Lauren said, and we need to go to these businesses or to these operations and do what the people are doing on the pipeline, chaining themselves to machinery and things like that. We need to change the site of protest in general, both to mess with business and to expose where the real power structure is, because it's not in Washington. But the other thing that we need to do in terms of the environmental movement in general is to diversify it. When we talk about environmental justice, which is what I hope more people talk about instead of just like sustainability or in the environment, we need to recognize the fact that poor communities and communities of color are the communities that are affected first. And that's true around the world. It's true around the world due to our foreign policy and our business policy, because frankly we dump a lot of hazardous waste in poor countries. We pay them for it. But it's true in America as well, because as an example, a lot of the Superfund sites where we dump toxic waste in America are, in communities of color, or they're in Appalachia, where the poor white people are, they're in these places. And the places where we have, destructive factories and nuclear plants, they're in poor neighborhoods, basically. So from an environmental justice angle, we need to involve those communities more. But from a strategic angle, and I talk about this in the context of Move to Amend, we need to diversify our field if we're going to have success. One of the ways I talk about it in terms of Move to Amend is Like I said, I live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles and San Francisco for quite some time have had no racial majority. A few months ago, California officially became that as well. And if we look at the way the Republican Party has been talking since the election ended last year, and their entire focus is like, we need to improve our image with minorities. We need to reach out to like Latino people. We need to do this and we need to do that. And it's not like they're suddenly not racist. It's that they want to win. And from both an environmental justice standpoint, we need everybody if we're going to win, because everybody is affected. But from just the perspective of winning, we need to diversify our ranks in general. And the poor, sorry, I'm losing my face. And thoughts are popping up, and there are a whole bunch of different things that I want to talk about. Before time leaks out, I also wanted to mention what's happening in Utah that Lauren mentioned for a second, and the Fearless Summer campaign that hasn't been as big as I wanted it to be, but it's another example of the type of action that we need to be doing. There's this Canadian company called U.S. Oil Sands, and they're trying to open the first tar sands mine in the United States in Utah right now. So Peaceful Uprising, a climate activist group that's based in Utah, is basically trying to make it too expensive for them to open it. I think they were supposed to get started a long time ago, but there have been a lot of like public outcry and protest leading up to it, and they've delayed it, and it's become more and more expensive and more expensive and more expensive. Last week was, I think, the first big day of their actual on-site protest, where they peacefully got the workers to shut down their machines. And as a result, the stock for U.S. Oil Sands, I think, dropped like 12 or 13%.
And no arrests.
Yeah, but that's the type of sort of creative action that affects companies' bottom lines that we need to do as a movement. Because I every time I go to a rally where I always lament that in Los Angeles, one of the good things is it's very easy to get to know the activist community, and that's a horrible thing because we have 60 million people, and you know, if you go to like events for a few months, you know everybody. And the biggest thing we need is people, and I think the biggest way to get people is to have more creative actions. Because normal protest, I feel, has failed. Rallies, every time I'm at a rally, I was just saying, where there are a bunch of speakers and we talk and we need to do this and then we clap and we get a permit and then we leave. It pisses me off because it's like, well, if we're all here together, we could be doing something. Rallies that don't have a work component need to be phased out. Like if we're all together, the least that we can do is pick up trash or plant a garden. Something as small as that is something. Rallies where if we can get people together, as disconnected as we are by social medias and our addictions, I'm on Facebook all the time. But if we can actually get people together away from their screens, big and small, we need to do something. And I think that's the biggest thing. But in general, we need to be multi-generational. We need to be multiracial, and we need to have creative actions that connect all of our issues, because all of our issues are connected. And the corporate issue, which is what I work on the most, I think really does connect everything, but the environment itself, and if we speak about it in the context of extinction and collapse, it should connect everything else too. And I think if we start speaking of things in a serious way, not trying to scare people, but in a very serious way, and are able to communicate that seriousness and move people to action and give people something to do, because a lot of people who are working people who might not have the time to be activists because they have children or because they're working 2 jobs because we don't have any good jobs available. If you invite them to something that has an action component, I feel like they're more likely to come. Yeah, that's it for me.
Wonderful. And I just want to resonate with Yeah, with Daniel's mentioning Utah and how the determination of peaceful uprising and others, really held things up significantly, and then the stock price tumbled for the tar sands company working there. And there's this campaign called Fearless Summer, which really harnesses the power of that courage, the power of our standing up for this vision that brings us together and that rescues our future. That's, it's something that we want to think about as not just a fearless summer, but a fearless forever. And the title to our afternoon sessions has a typo in it. It says from fearless summer to fearless year, but we really want to think about this as a shift from fearless summer to fearless forever. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to someone who's been fearless lifelong in his struggle for social and economic justice, as a labor leader, as a leader for immigrant rights, and as a leader, I think, of a new vision that very much pulls us together. So, Richard, you can introduce yourself.
Currently, I've made some changes in terms of direction and attempting to utilize the trajectory of my work and history to try to accomplish something that I think is at the very core of the subject of a lot of discussions we're having over these last few days and into tomorrow. So currently, I am also on the national leadership of the Move to Amend that I've joined over the last few months, and also Secretary of Labor under Jill and Sherry, and feel very humble about that. But also I'm International Vice President of Workers United that is affiliated with SEIU, and I'm the Assistant Manager of the Chicago Midwest Regional Joint Board that we cover the 8 states in the Midwest, from Minnesota to Michigan to Missouri. So I've tried to join these organizations in this movement to try, because I feel that we've reached a critical juncture, a nodal point, if you will. And I think that one of the things that in the introduction, the first sentence of what this Earth Democracy Plenary says is a movement for democracy and justice is sweeping the globe. And that's a very powerful statement, I think, in terms of something that's happening around us. And whether people, like in Venezuela, you could say there was a sweep there. Does every individual understand what they're fighting for? I don't think so. 80% of the population of Venezuela lived in absolute poverty. But they know that something is wrong and prepared to fight it. And they look to the people who present the answers. And I have, like you, lived in this country and started when I was 17 fighting, and have been fighting, and I've tried to learn what I'm fighting about and where am I going, why, what is the solution, and where can I do that. And I, like many practical revolutionaries that grow in experience and begin to fight back, didn't do that until I didn't arrive there intellectually. I arrived there because I saw my family, what they went through. I saw my community, and I said, first I need to help my family. And I realized that I didn't have the wherewithal to help my family. And so then I tried to help my community, and I realized I didn't have the wherewithal to help my community. And I said, I need to figure out what is causing this problem. And I've always, I guess by trade, I'm a maintenance mechanic. Worked in a perforating company in Chicago for about 12 years. That's when I was with the Steelworkers, president of my local. But I learned something, again, on a practical level, that when you have a problem and your car won't start, you could start taking things out and replacing them willy-nilly, right? Maybe the radiator will solve the problem, right? Maybe the carburetor. Maybe we'll change the wheels. But, you know, and you realize you can buy a whole new car and you just might have a wire that's disconnected, right? So it's better to first assess what is the problem. And I've certainly been trying to do that over a long period of time. Have been unable to present what is the practical steps. Not what our goal is, not paradise, not heaven or socialism, but what are the practical steps from where we're at? Because the majority of the people in this country understand the problem practically. Not ideologically, not theoretically, not philosophically. It's that there's a dog biting me on my leg. And we can talk about the bear in the woods that might get him, but right now the problem is the dog. Right? So we have to try to deal with the dog. And so if I look back over the last 10 years, just the last 10 years, in 2006, millions of people poured out into the streets without the intellectuals, without the socialists, right? Without anybody organizing them, telling them. They went out into the streets and said they would not accept the attack against them that Sensenbrenner had put forward in Congress. Millions of people in the street. Wow. That's something. And then, you know, you have the Occupy movement. And maybe some thinkers got together and said, let's do this. But it resonated. Why did it resonate? Because those thinkers reached people and convinced them to do things? No, I believe it was the practical question of what people faced in their lives. Lack of opportunity, lack of hope. And they were blaming somebody, and it resonated to blame them, the 1%. Blame the corporation. And it resonated for a period of time. And then the third one is when the politicians in the right wing attacked the rights of workers. In Wisconsin, they self-organized themselves. SEIU didn't call it. The AFL-CIO didn't call it. Working people were angry enough to go to the streets and express it. Here, in that way. In Ohio, in a much more organized, traditional way. But it was a reaction. 65% rejected the curtailment of workers' rights in the state of Ohio in a vote. It says to me that those three events over the last 10 years says to me something's changed. Now, we've observed the change over 50 years. You know, through the 70s, through the Regan period of the 80s, through the 90s. Look at, you know, we were talking earlier around immigrant rights. Ronald Reagan signed an amnesty for immigrants. We can't get that done today. Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican, passed, you know, and then Clinton passes NAFTA. I mean, but the government has restructured itself, and anybody that opposed the neoliberal policies have been drummed out. Howard Dean is no socialist, but he didn't quite agree with the neoliberal policies and had a different trajectory. They drove him out of politics. And that's what they'll do. Republican or Democrat, if you don't toe the line with a current program under the Democratic form or the Republican form, they drive you out. But we've seen this trajectory, but yet through each of these stages, whether it was Ronald Reagan or the 1990s or the crises that have been compounded in terms of the economy, the American people have not responded. But they've responded in these three forms. So I think it's something to examine, and I think it's, I felt compelled to take a step back and examine my trajectory. So, you know, I have not been a part of the movement around the environment. I have not been around the movement for climate change. That does not mean I am not a fighter for climate change. That does not mean I am not a fighter for the environment. I'm busy on another front. Right? And so you have the movement, the environmental movement, very important, has played historically but totally on the defensive. Where are we winning? And we do win in local areas, and we are moving forward. I listen to the gardens and all the things that we can do. But in terms of policy in the United States, we're not really influencing. And that's where it's all at. And so all the other things that we do are important and fine and we should do. And the education and the examples and models that we promote are important. But we're still at a critical point in terms of the environment. And worsen. And we could take a look at the trade union movement and look at its trajectory over the last 50 years and see what has happened to what was a progressive movement that was expanding and impacting other communities. Still a lot of racism in the trade union movement in the UAW. Hell, African Americans had to sue the steel workers and get a consent decree to have their grievances filed in the steel mills. So there was a battle and development inside of that movement that had to take place. I was telling Daniel that I marched from Austin to Washington D.C. with the Texas farm workers, and we marched all the way through the South. It took over a month and a half, 20 miles a day, but we were trying to accomplish something, and so. In all the things that we do and all the attempts that we do to try to alter things, we've gotten to a certain point where it's no longer effective. The small models of doing some of these things no longer work. So the differences in our movements, we have to examine our movements. I know one thing, that the current form of the trade union movement is not going to work. We've been concession bargaining for the last 30 years. We got nowhere to go, and we got nothing else to give. The last proposal that we struck for a day, and it was good workforce in St. Paul, Minnesota, but they proposed dramatic changes in the contract which would have eliminated our ability to defend the workers in the shop floor. A form of right to work inside the contract. I mean, once you do that, what's left? What's left of your contracts? What's left of the union movement? So we're at a critical point in trying to deal with this. But inside the union movement, I learned something. Because all of our workers come to the workplace from segregated communities, right? The African Americans, they live in African American communities. Here in Milwaukee, one of the most segregated cities in the country, African Americans come from the African American community, don't live near whites, don't live near the Europeans. And the whites come from their European communities, the old Polish communities or ethnic communities. They don't live near blacks. The Latinos live in their community. But in the workplace, they're united based upon work. And so we have to deal with all the conflicts that arise from people living in segregated communities, not understanding each other, distrust, lack of confidence. How do you unify this? And we have mastered a way of doing that, some of us, not all of us. Some of us have mastered a way of bringing the different cultures, different languages, different experiences into one common experience. And that's what we're lacking in the overall movement. We've been working separated for far too long. Environmental, women's, trade unions. We're all in different fronts. It's time for us to bring together and begin to be the leadership of the potential that's out there that we've seen from the last 3 major events in the last 10 years to provide an organizational leadership and a political expression. And so I'm willing to come here and work and attempt to bring together the various aspects and deal with our differences. Because I'm not vegan, I smoke, and I love my alcohol. You know what, a reporter once asked Jenny Rivera in Spanish, he said, well, we heard that you have a problem.
I want to piggyback on a couple things Richard said. One question, I think, you know, it's really clear that convergence is the order of the day, that uniting and overcoming the divide and conquer framework that we're up against is really critical. I'm not sure, you know, what's the wording that we're using here? Clearly convergence, and I think global is really in order today. This is about getting out of our silos imposed by national boundaries, which are fairly arbitrary and artificial, although they're historic, and getting out of our silos based on the issues and the organizations that we've been with. But, you know, how do we overcome that? Is this a climate convergence, or is this just a convergence for people, peace, and the planet? I think it needs to be as inviting and engaging as possible, because the clock is ticking. We don't have a lot of time, whether you're looking at the winding down of our economy, it's crashing, the state of economic emergency that so many people are in right now, or whether you look at the state of the climate, which is clearly also, you know, very much on a trajectory that's over the cliff and killing people by the hundreds of thousands every year right now. So one question is, you know, what do we call this? What's the name of this thing? And by grappling with that, I think we're grappling with a bigger question of the vision. And then I want to underscore two other points. One is that we're clearly talking about deeper and systemic change here. We want to be doing the particulars of a certain kind of energy or certain kinds of agricultural systems, but we're talking fundamentally about changing the system because of what I think Richard was just referring to, which is that in spite of all of our best actions, and in spite of having the majority of the population, you know, behind this stuff, it's still accelerating in the wrong direction. We may win an occasional battle, but we're basically losing the war on all fronts right now. So it's really important that we grapple with what is the higher vision, what is the higher systemic change, whether we call it anti-capitalism or anti-corporatism. You know, I think there's still, we are struggling with the language, but it's clear that both of these systems of thought have really important historic contributions to make to our thinking and to our framework. And then the last point I want to make is that we're not only about stopping what's bad, we're very much about starting what we need. And it's really critical that we fold into this discussion, I think, jobs and the economy. This is fundamentally about this. We cannot stop the expansion of fracking unless we are offering people who are desperate for work what the job situation, what the economy looks like. Fortunately, the reality is on our side because we can create far more jobs in a clean energy economy, and we can create them right now, even with people who don't have high school degrees. We can put them to work on the massive undertaking to conserve energy, to insulate our homes, businesses, schools, workplaces, etc. So there's a bonanza to be had of creating jobs, of creating good jobs and community-based jobs. So we can put people to work in worker cooperatives and so on in a Green New Deal kind of plan. And I think it's really important that we get our heads together around what is the plan and what are the demands, and then what is the strategy that goes with it that we can really unite around and stand up. So with that, we'll open it up to discussion. We have about 35 minutes, and why don't we take, say, 3 questions at a time, and then let the panel respond.
Can I just quickly announce the Know Your Rights training for tomorrow?
Yeah, go ahead.
So for folks that want to go lock down to their local corporate offices and take some of the action we're talking about, tomorrow at between 10 and 12 in room D315, I'm doing a Know Your Rights training for activists, which just gives you the basics of what to know about how the legal system works, what's legal and what's not. And after that, the panel is scheduled to go till 1, but I'm not going to need all that time. So any local campaigns or groups that have any particular legal questions, if they want to, I'm kind of going to open up a Lucy Peanuts style little booth, and any questions folks have for a lawyer, I'm happy to sit around and answer questions for folks if they have them.
Great, thank you, Lauren. It's going to be critical going forward. And there's a website here where you can basically go to just stay in touch, to continue this conversation, and for all of us to basically begin organizing on creating this movement. And what we've put forward here is this idea of having a series of conferences where we essentially create a space to continue talking and creating this movement. For those of us who identify in the climate movement, what we're doing here is trying to redefine the climate movement, to fill that vacuum that begs to be filled, to get beyond sort of the narrow definition of the climate movement around stopping a pipeline or a series of pipelines in the U.S., because what Keystone has just done is announced an alternate pipeline that will just go through Canada. So it's really important that we define a bigger vision. And so you can be a part of that by registering at that website and then beginning to plan a series of conferences which will plan our actions for basically a year from now. We're targeting a year from now to think about holding a global direct actions all around the world for people, peace, and the planet. Can we put together an agenda of demands of what we are instructing our elected officials that they need to get busy with right now, or it's curtains, to just expect to be shown the way out if they're not prepared to help build the way forward. So what is that agenda? What's the blueprint for it? And then what are the actions that we're going to take to make that an unstoppable force for taking back our future? So,
just a thought on planning actions for fall of an election year. There are also a lot of us in the trenches trying to hold the dike. There are, on the federal level, people are pretty sold out, but on a local level, whether you have a Democrat or a Republican office makes a big difference in our daily lives. So when you guys plan big, huge actions in the fall, those of us who are, we can't do it.
Worthy point, and I'd say be sure to follow up, plug into the dialogue so we can have discussion. Nothing is written in stone here. Let's have a couple of comments and then we'll take responses. So let's take 1, 2, 3, 4 to start with, okay, and then we'll work our way over to the other side. Go ahead.
We have to get political action against Monsanto because the infidel plant is so toxic, it doesn't even touch it. The Monsanto longleaf potato is legally classified as a pesticide.
It what? I'm sorry?
It is legally classified as a pesticide.
The potato itself?
Yes.
Incredible.
Well,
Wow.
we're eating it.
Unbelievable. Yeah, one?
No matter how young you are here, it's going to be almost impossible to have the whole vision spelled out in the next few years, right? That's the goal that we all need to work for. But I'm thinking, like what Richard said, if we could just identify the next few steps. It's hard to figure it out, but it's like writing a novel. You're never done. We're not going to have this whole huge vision finished in any time now that we need, that we have to work on this fast. So what I'd like to ask anybody up there, this is totally intuitive, right? It's not, do you have the whole step-by-step plan of how we should go to socialism, how we should go to economic justice? Not that. What do you think, where do you think we should start? What are the next step or 2 steps that we need to take?
Great. Who else? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of discussion about creative actions convergence, and the next few steps. And I wanted to give you 2 next few steps that are up and coming. So if you can mark your calendar, for example, tomorrow there is a potluck and a pool party at 5923 Century Avenue, Sunday at 5 p.m. in Middleton. One of the greatest organizers here in Wisconsin is inviting all the conference members to come for further discussion. And it's basically bring a potluck and go to the pool party tomorrow at 5. There's more information. The phone number is 608-514-8131, or you can email info-to-share@hotmail.com. So that's for everyone. And the other major thing that's happening, and Occupy was brought up a lot, is that there's the Occupy National Gathering happening August 21st to the 25th in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is right around the corner. And the topic is decolonize the 99%. And that's really something to think about in terms of food for thought, because we have a certain way of thinking that all of our speakers have brought to light. There is a different way. So in this decolonization process, I'd like to invite you all to check out the net at occupynationalgathering.net and get involved, especially on the 23rd, which is going to be titled Clean Earth Day. So thanks very much for immediate steps.
Thank you, and there was one more comment. Let's take one more. Okay, go ahead.
If we're talking about events, I think August 24th in DC is an important event, because that's the follow-up to Dr. King's march on for jobs and freedom. I believe it's his 60th anniversary or 50th anniversary. And I mean, that's a way to branch out. It's our population of people. We need to be joined. And the other thing is, very, very simplistically, for publicity consideration, there's only one thing that everything has in common, and that's the planet. There's nothing in our universe that we all have in common other than the planet. And and that's it's as simple as can be. But
Thank you. So, panelists who want to respond to any one part of it, go ahead, Victor.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll take like.
I'd just like to respond briefly to the issue of next practical steps. There are many that are already being planned and discussed, like the opposition to the Trans-Pacific Pipeline and so on, all of which are good. But I would like to say at the same time that this shouldn't be held in opposition to the idea of building up a vision. The process of building up a vision has to be integral to the whole thing for a couple of reasons. First of all, to sustain the movement, because if you just go from one practical thing to another, you have this kind of an upsurge and then it's done. You have a campaign to vote down a right to work law. Okay, it's done. But then what continues? To build a movement, to continue, the theoretical part and the motivational part comes from the whole vision, and it has to be integral. The other thing is not only to sustain it, but also to help you imagine what needs to be done. I think this has already been made, but I think we have to keep the idea that theory and practice are inseparable. And it's an old cliche, but that's what it involves. All the time that we're thinking of practical steps, we're at the same time educating both ourselves and other people in order to build something that'll grow.
And I just wanted to add, one of the biggest things that we need to get over in terms of the next step is this fear of trying things. I think a lot of people recognize around the country and have recognized all of their lives something is wrong. There's something inherently wrong with the system. So we have to get over our fear of trying things. But I've been doing some research on that point, and I would just like to recommend a couple of books. There's a book called, I think it's Richard Hyman, called The End of Growth.
End of what?
The End of Growth. And I think one of the things that we need to focus on as a movement is post-growth societies, because that's what a lot of the economists think about, and that's like the worst thing for the environment. There's another good book called Prosperity Without Growth, which is good. And there's another, I forget the author of that one. And then the last book is The Spirit Level, which gives a lot of really hard statistical data that supports the notion that more equal societies are healthier, and they do better in terms of all types of social issues, but they're better for the environment in general as well. But yeah, that's basically all I want to say.
Great, thank you. Lauren?
So I was going to kind of dovetail off of something that Daniel mentioned during his talk, which is this idea of people calling an action like a rally or a get-together. I think we need to be really honest with ourselves about what is warm, fuzzy socializing amongst each other versus something that's actually moving you forward toward your goals. I think both can be important. Getting to know each other and forming trusting relationships is necessary in building a movement, but that is not an action. A rally amongst the same 30 people each and every time, where most of us have not chanted in probably months because we're so sick of chanting and holding signs. Our signs are all worn out at this point. I mean, it's not a valuable outreach tool, in my opinion. We're hardly getting media for them because they're happening so regularly. And so just be frank that, that is not an action moving you toward your goal. Like you mentioned, marching down to Chamber of Commerce or the corporate headquarters, even if that is on the lawful public sidewalk holding signs and whatnot, at least it is, toward the right target. And then briefly, the other thing I was just going to mention is I often am lecturing to college students and young activists on frontlines campaigns, and one of the things I'm constantly trying to drill in their heads is you really have to know thy history in order to not repeat it. And I think when coming up with the next best actions and tactics, which I definitely do think is imperative to keeping a vibrant movement, you need to look at what's already been tried. Did it succeed? Did it fail? And why? And then adapt it to this modern climate and move forward with it. And I think that is part of, it's tough to do intergenerational work and build solidarity amongst different generations and make it not mom lecturing me type of thing, but that type of strategy work, I go to my local forest group in Eugene is made up of mostly college students, 19 to 20, and we meet before going out to the bars. And sometimes it's really hard for me to sit there and hear them doing all the same things that we tried, during the 90s, and they're getting ready to do it all again. And I feel like this old lady be like, we tried that and it didn't work. That's not the way to present it. The way is, we had this thing and we did it like this and we all got arrested and we were all on probation for 3 years and couldn't do activism, and maybe there's a way to do it a little different. I think we really have to put our creative brains to work, but we also need to hold history and all the other movements that have come before us in an important place in moving forward.
And Richard?
Yeah, I think it's important that we sort of try to not talk apples and oranges, but talk oranges, let's talk oranges. And when I talk about next step, when Martin Luther King shifted from, the struggle for civil rights for African Americans to the battle against poverty in the United States, that was the next step to me. Not whether or not they did an action in Memphis and then went maybe to Florida and did another action there. Those actions and those plans were part of the old next steps. We're still doing that. We're gonna continue to do what we're doing. I can't do no other except protect the contracts I got. I got a bargain contract. But when I look at a next step for the trade union movement, what has happened? The National Labor Relations Act was never good enough. We've needed labor reform since that was passed. The last fundamental labor reform we got was the Taft-Hartley Act that allowed right-to-work states, that put more controls on the unions, that stopped the trajectory. One out of three workers were in unions at that point, but that's where it stopped because of the Taft-Hartley. So, I don't care how many demonstrations you do against Walmart, I think it's been pretty much proven nothing's gonna change. Now, winning over people to the idea that Walmart is bad, we should keep doing that. That's an educational thing. That's an education that comes from our actions. But in terms of next step, look, we went from, during the Carter administration demanding labor law reform to a few years ago, the Employee Free Choice Act, which was a total compromise in labor law reform. And now we don't even have the Employee Free Choice Act on the table. That is, and we're still demonstrating against Walmart. We still have not solved that problem, that whether or not poor and working people are gonna be able to negotiate over the terms of their labor that expresses themselves how and where they're gonna live. If you make minimum wage, you're gonna live in a minimum wage community. Your children are gonna go to minimum wage school. They're gonna dress in minimum wage clothes. You know, their life is gonna be defined by that minimum wage. If you make $30 an hour, you're gonna live in a $30 an hour community. Your children will go to a $30 an hour school. Those things are defining us. They're defining our communities, they're defining our families. So should we do something different? Yes. Okay, what is that next step? Clearly, we must do something fundamentally different than just demonstrating against Walmart. Now, if there's a Walmart demonstration tomorrow, I will send members there. But that is not a next step.
Yeah.
And what and it's obvious that I'm here and promoting the idea that the environmental movement, our movement, and other movements gotta come together and formulate a next step. We need environmental laws. We need labor laws. And on down the line, we gotta reverse the attack against women's rights that's sort of spreading in this country through these gerrymandered Republican communities. We gotta deal with that. So we gotta create a movement that is expansive, grows, and what are the conditions of that next step? So that's, when I was talking practical next steps, I said because people in their experience know something's wrong. They don't know what to do about it. They don't know how, we went from a march of millions in 2006 to immigration law that's being debated in the House that is worse. That is worse.
Yep.
So millions march in the streets, should have a major impact, and doesn't. What do we learn from that? What do we learn from a motion that people are paying too much for their health care? There's a movement for universal health care, and we end up with a bill that helps the corporations, the insurance companies and all that, and really doesn't resolve anything for our communities. In unions, our insurance costs have skyrocketed, gone crazy. I know I've gone over it, but I want to, so the next step is sort of dealing with that problem.
Wait every minute of it. Okay, Chris and there, Eric, 2, Sandra, 3. Oh, so why don't you go first, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, go ahead.
It's an idea that Richard was talking about. We've got to get in the streets. I just thought of a method that might work, or a gimmick that might work. Something to the effect of, let's go out and play in the streets. Will you come play in the streets with me? And have different groups, all in the same day. Try to get it, all 50 states, same time, same day. And get a crowd of people that represent labor, a crowd of people that represent another one for problems. And do it all at once, an attack. And using that, come out and play theme. It might get.
For those who couldn't hear, that was a suggestion that we use the theme of coming out to play, to bring different groups together, to pack the streets.
Play in the streets.
Play in the streets. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the key, most important key next steps is actually independence from the Democrats and building a real political alternative to them, because there's absolutely no solution on the local level or on the federal level that comes through the Democratic Party. We will get killed. There is so much evidence that I was part of the fight for the the union law that would have allowed us to unionize. And we relied on the Democrats, and what did we get? And you could replicate that example in many, many different realms. The environmental movement, including 350 and Bill McGibbon, et cetera, gagged themselves as a result of a 2009 meeting with the White House, who said, don't talk about climate change. They agreed not to talk about climate change. We'll just talk about clean energy. That's why we never heard about it in the 2012 elections, because the climate change movement had self-censored themselves in order to stay in touch with the Democrats. And that is a completely failed and losing strategy, and we have to move away from it. The other thing that we have to really talk about is what qualifies as environmental activism, because I strongly agree we need to totally redefine and broaden the scope of what that really means. And if we're not putting the question of racial justice at the center of that organizing, then we're not really being environmentalists, and we're not really talking about justice. Because if you look at all of the successes that came out of the late 60s in the environmental movement there, were great, of course, and that's where we have all the best laws coming from. And actually, Regan was the first person to also put abortion laws in California as governor. He also put loads of environmental laws as governor of California. What changed in the 1980s when he took all those things back was the political climate. And so the idea of concessionary bargaining, I mean, the UAW now has two-tier wage structure, took 50% pay cuts, Right, three-tier, and so the danger, though, I think, in broadening that question out is to talk about as individuals what we can do to make individual change, because I think the environmental movement, as I said, for the successes that it had, then veered off in the late 70s and the early 80s into questions of saving whales and forests, middle class, mostly white concerns, which I'm not saying are unimportant, but if you put that as your main thing alongside the question of population, which was a huge issue at the same time, you leave no space for working people, you leave no space for African Americans, because they cannot be involved, because it doesn't speak to them, and in fact it's against their interests, and it's all about the politics of blame. And I think vegetarianism and veganism, if you want to do that, that's fine. Again, I don't think that that is an answer, because it alienates people and it actually starts blaming people as if consumption is the problem, when millions of people in this country, 1 in 5 children, don't get enough food to eat every day, actually need to consume more, not less. So I think we need to be talking about the production and the problem there. And that's actually where we have our strength, because we make all the stuff, right? So, and one of the strengths of the labor movement, and it's so good that the labor movement is getting involved, because we clearly need to broaden it out with regard to that too. Because one of the strengths has been bringing people from different backgrounds together, working in the same workplace, where you have to address questions of race, and where you have to address questions of internationalism as well, because we need to move on an international scope, and we need to take care of immigrants and say that they should actually be part of this country as much as anybody else. So it's really a question of internationalism too, and I think that I actually don't think it's about informing people. I think most Americans already know how bad climate change is and want to do something about it. The latest polls substantiate that. Over 3/4 of Americans, 77%, say something should be done about climate change, and the government isn't doing enough. And contrary to all of them, so most people already know from their lived experience, many of those people may not believe in science, but the world is changing, and not in good ways, and people understand that. The problem is not in terms of informing people. I'm not against education, I'm a teacher. The problem is organizing and mobilizing. That is really where the question comes in. And I agree with Victor very strongly that we need to do the concrete day-to-day issues, but we cannot get so drawn down into those that we're not also thinking about a much, much bigger vision for change and a genuinely human-based society where we can live together as equals in where we value all things, in the living and the non-living world, because we know that we actually depend on that side of things to stay alive. And so we need actually both things together, both the short-term concrete organizing stuff as well as the longer-term vision. And that needs to incorporate, for example, forming environmental contingents on the demonstration on August 24th to stand in solidarity with people fighting against the racism of the Trayvon Martin case or the Supreme Court. and move from there, because I really think we need to broaden things out and clearly build organization, not just on the streets, but also politically.
And just by way of introduction, that's Chris Williams, who's one of the leaders of the eco-socialist movement, which is a very important point of convergence as well. Eric, yeah.
Regan.
Sorry.
Thanks for using the word politics. As I was listening about how we converge, all about mass movements and getting your friends and all this, I felt like what was missing was politics, if you will.
Yeah.
So I would hypothesize, and you can discuss this, that a very good experiment that we ought to try is a tripartisan government somewhere. Some of you know I'm running for governor of Colorado, and I made this up just last night because of everything I've been hearing, that the best form of government would be a Republican Senate, Democratic House, and some third party as a governor. That way they can pass all the stupid bills they want, governor can veto everything, they can get along great. And wouldn't it be great if the Republicans and Democrats got along together? Because there's a third party, right? But there's a third party that will stop the stupidity, right? And maybe ask for something more than, I don't have this part of the speech worked out yet, but ask for something more than a corporatist Democratic Party fight.
Thank you.
But who are
Sam,
we
I
gonna
think
hate?
you were-
That's what you're trying to say. We're supposed to like each other and work with each other.
So
We
the
have
whole
to
model,
continue to hate.
I need to say this, if I may, the whole model moves from a football team to a council that's gonna run government. So it's a way to converge government away from a football team.
Take Sanda, and then we'll give the panel a chance to
Okay,
respond.
so I'm glad those people went before me because they said some of the same stuff that I would have wanted to say, though I first wanted to say I was fortunate enough to go to the Global Climate Change Conference in Cancun 3 years ago is now, and in of the great disappointment of nothing happening, there was a big push, the idea that our governments are not going to do it for us. It does need to happen at the local level. So it's cool that you're doing all the local stuff, but I also would urge you not to depend on 350.org and the Sierra Club because they're bought and owned by the Democratic Party. And like he just talked, at some point they're going to shut down. And they're going to lean because the corporations are controlling them. It's unfortunate. I mean, I was a Democrat, but probably a lot of us were. But I also would like to see us not think it's, if the alternative is capitalism or socialism. I mean, I think we're forming here a new model of economic justice, and I think if we try to, I'm really committed. Right now, the Green Party, I looked into the platform last night, the only mention of capitalism is that we're against corporate capitalism. And people always go, well, you never come out and say you're not a capitalist party. But we're not a socialist party either, and I don't think that dichotomy shouldn't be the choice. I mean, I think we need to be something new and learn a lot from socialism, but socialism isn't the answer to, plus it freaks out a lot of people, and my husband's a socialist. But, so I get to hear all the time how the Green Party doesn't have class consciousness, which I don't believe for a minute. So I think independent political action is really important, and I'm really excited by the work. I mean, I've been working with Jill now since we thought somebody else was going to run for president and stuff, and I think it's really exciting the work that the Green Party is doing.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Stephanie, and then we'll come on down the line.
I just wanted to address what the local 350 means again, because it's not like Sierra Club where we have our bylaws and marching orders from the national group. So what's great about the local is we can do the local building here. So that's where we're not tied to 350 national and what they tell us to do. We come in where it resonates with the community, and that's where the local movement is the focus. The local movement is the goal, and so that's where we use the different entry points like Citizens Climate Lobby, like the Green Party, like wherever we can find people to bring them together so that we're resilient to any selling out that happens. So I just wanted
Cool.
to clarify that.
Great, thanks. And I'll just add to that, that there are many local 350s around the country that really have taken a much more principled and aggressive stand on all kinds of things, and they're not, you know, the larger national 350 seems to think that being apolitical means telling Obama we've got your back. That's apolitical, and silencing any opposition to the political establishment. That's being apolitical. But there are many local 350s that don't buy into that and really play a much a very helpful role in informing people that they have political choices, and some of them are, what should we say, not the usual suspects who are really behind the catastrophe that we're facing, that there are some political independent groups who are actually doing the right stuff. So thanks, local 350s, for doing the right thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of the political question, one of the things that we just really need to do is be honest ourselves. I think there's this tendency to be open and honest once we're in a room of like-minded individuals or activists, but like in our day-to-day lives, when people talk about like their support for Obama, or like I like John McCain because he's a maverick, or like Ron Paul, blah blah blah, even though, you know, he has this connection to all of these like neo-Nazis and all that crap. But we need to be honest with those people. We need to be honest about the fact that both of the major parties are owned by corporations, and all of our government is basically owned by corporations, not just on the national level. ALEC, it does most of its work on the state level. So a lot of our state representatives are too. So we need to be honest about that. But then in terms of environmental work, there are a lot of other organizations like Peaceful Uprising or Rising Tide or the Energy Action Coalition who are doing the work that's pushing like the larger groups like Sierra Club to say something like, you know, to lift their ban on direct action, or at least talk about lifting their ban. We were actually just talking to the VP of the Sierra Club, and it's not really lifted. It's some weird, like, bureaucratic bullshit. But there are a lot of other groups that aren't like, you know, those institutional players who might as well just be the Democratic Party that we can look to. Though I will give Bill McKibben some props, because he was in Richmond, California this past weekend, and he got arrested at that protest.
Great. Were you going to say something?
Yeah.
And then Victor?
I think there's a critical analysis that exists in a lot of what we say, and I don't know how to say it directly. You know, I feel like I'm compelled to say it, and yet I think we've already agreed to it, but we're not doing it. And that is that the Democrats and the Republicans, through their inaction, have essentially imposed an austerity program on the country. Consistent with that, in order to guarantee control of the country, they've moved more towards fascist and control of our actions in the streets. The example is that. So there's critical things that must be done. If we're going to remain a movement and be able to demonstrate and do the things that historically we've done in order to register, we're going to have to battle for real power. Not just demonstrate and go home and feel like we did something. But it is the battle for power. And what are the steps to do that? And first, we must bring together the leaders that are active in all the movements and formulate a political program that I think is out there in various forms. Green Party, what the Labor Party did, and all that. I consider myself a revolutionary. I don't think there's any other direction, either ideologically, philosophically, or practically, except some kind of socialist construct. What is its form? Is it, that's a long discussion. But the critical thing is we need to recognize that we can no longer work in our fronts and assume that we're going to accomplish what needs to be done. We have to begin to change the laws. In order to change the laws, we have to begin to elect our own representatives. In order to do that, we have to deal with the fact of money. We don't have the money, and the media will not be on our side. Therefore, I joined the move to amend. To attack that, the question of democracy so that the voiceless, so that the environmental movement, so that the people in poverty, so that they can have a voice. The second step is action. If if they're gonna pass laws to limit us, we have to pass laws to change that. We have to have a political formation to do that. And I don't agree with a lot of people, a lot of what organizations do. I may not agree with everything that the Green Party says and does, but I've decided that rather than sit on the sidelines and observe and say, well, we should do this and they should do that. Because I criticize my own union members, because they come to us and they say, well, why doesn't the union do this? Or why doesn't the union, well, who the hell is the union? Right? And similarly, what is my role and responsibility? And I feel a responsibility to come and struggle and present ideas and clash. If I didn't care, I won't spend my time anywhere that is non-productive. I just go somewhere else. Like, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference, right? But I care enough to, to participate here, to struggle, and it's gonna be a struggle of ideas. But it's absolutely critical that we have a political formation that is prepared to fight on all the fronts and fight for policy and governance, right? We have to begin to learn how to govern. We have to stop being in the back of the room yelling about what we don't like. But if we're gonna fight for power, then we gotta figure out how we're gonna work together to accomplish that. So, these are very important, critical questions, and it takes a long time, and I apologize if I
Okay.
And,